Hi Kaki Watson, most of you are aware that heart disease is one of the leading cause of death in Malaysia, but the heart disease itself is a general term for a number of heart conditions. So it might get confusing, so we have Dr. Yi from Pantai Hospital, a senior consultant cardiologist, to discuss this topic with us. Hi Doctor.
Hi, thanks for inviting me here.
For Doctor, so for heart disease, do you mind sharing with us the statistic and the death rate for heart disease in Malaysia?
Yeah, I'm actually very happy to talk about heart disease today because it is, after all, the number one killer in Malaysia. In fact, it's the number one killer worldwide. In 2021, we published the data where across the country, 17% of Malaysians who die, the mortality is due to heart disease.
So like I mentioned before, heart disease itself is a general term, right? So do you want to elaborate more on the type of heart disease that is found or more common in Malaysia?
So when we talk about heart disease, you're right. Yes, most of the time we refer to coronary heart disease. That's a blockage in the coronary blood vessels. But there's also diseases that affect the rest of the heart, diseases that affect the muscle itself. So we have cardiomyopathies. Then it could be also diseases affecting the valves. So there's a variety of heart diseases. For the purpose of today's discussion, I think what we talk about is probably the most common variety of heart disease, which is coronary artery disease.
Yeah. So when we mention coronary artery disease, right, is there a specific group of people that are more prone to get this disease compared to others?
Good question, because you see, many people think that coronary disease is a disease that affects mainly men and it's a disease that affects mainly the elderly, which is not true. Coronary artery disease is actually indiscriminate. Do you know that number one cause of death in women is also heart disease? A lot of people, when I ask them what do you think causes more death in women than any other thing, a lot of people come up with breast cancer or things like that, but it's not. Heart disease, there are more women dying from heart attacks than they do of breast cancer. So it's the number one cause for men and women. In the past, we used to think heart disease is something that affects the elderly.
Yes, that's true.
But yes, the incidence of heart disease does go up with age because it is a disease that's caused by aging, the process of atherosclerosis, narrowing of the blood vessels. But increasingly, in my practice, we're seeing younger and younger patients presenting with heart disease. It's not uncommon these days to have patients even as young as 30s or 40s who present with heart attacks. In fact, my youngest patient is in his early 20s with heart attacks. So they're becoming younger nowadays. So the young can be affected, the elderly can be affected. So it's indiscriminate.
As you mentioned before, that younger people are more diagnosed nowadays with heart disease. Then is there any kind of causes or risk factor that people should be aware of?
Well, there are many things that can contribute to coronary artery disease. In fact, nowadays another major risk factor is stress.
So as you mentioned, stress is one of the leading causes nowadays. So what kind of stressful condition do you think that trigger this coronary heart disease?
I think the problem nowadays is that stress is becoming more and more common. In my practice, for example, I see a lot of young people coming up to me. They complain of stress, they can't sleep, they have high blood pressure, they're having palpitations, and they're worried whether there's a heart problem. Stress is actually a body's response. When you have stress, our body copes by releasing some hormones to counter the stress. That could be a surge of hormones like cortisol and adrenaline drive. And you get high levels of cortisol in our bloodstream, high levels of adrenaline flowing. That actually damages our blood vessels. That eventually leads to coronary artery disease.
So I think most of the time, people, they have to limit the stress. To reduce the stress by exercises, or do you agree with meditation? Those can help with stress as well?
Yes, there's many ways which we can treat stress. First and most important thing is actually one needs to recognize that they are in a stressful situation, because sometimes there are many people who don't realize they are even stressed. Then you can actually take the necessary steps to try and alleviate your stress levels. No matter how much our workload is, you may have to dedicate some time for exercise. And exercise is actually a very good way to de-stress. It actually helps reduce our level of stress, and it actually reduces our blood pressure as well. And also exercise reduces our cholesterol, and sugar levels. So there's a lot of benefits with exercise. So making sure you have time away from work, regular exercises, making sure you have enough rest and sleep. And time away from work is also important. Time with the family, I think that's important. People always forget that, And I think all that will actually help reduce your stress. So a healthy lifestyle, in fact a healthy diet as well is important. And if you find that despite all that, and you still can't cope with stress, then of course, then you should seek, a professional help. And there are psychologists, psychiatrists, and people who can help you reduce your stress levels.
You mentioned before about healthy diet as well. So, what kind of diet do you really recommend for your patients who are diagnosed with coronary artery disease?
Well, for coronary artery disease, as I said, there are many factors, but generally speaking, what we want is a healthy heart diet. The essential principles of healthy heart diet is basically having a balanced diet, eating healthily, the right portions of food, I think we Asians, for example, we eat too much carbs. What we are finding out from our latest research, for example, is that carbohydrates are even worse than cholesterol itself. So, sugar is a big problem. If you look at what's a balanced diet? A balanced diet, for example, if you take a plate, it should be only a quarter to be filled with rice or grains or carbohydrates, and a quarter of protein, and at least half of the plate should be filled with vegetables and fruits. That's a rough guide to the proportion of food that we should be eating. Balanced diet is important, cutting down the carbohydrate, cutting down the cholesterol content, and cutting down the total amount of fat, but also the type of fat is important.
That is true.
Yeah? So what we want to avoid are things like trans fat and saturated fats. Whereas you want healthy fats, like the polyunsaturated fats, those that are found in nuts, things like that, which is actually very healthy.
So Kaki Watson, it's time for us to take control of our diet and our lifestyle so we are able to take more care about our heart. So Dr. Yee, do you have anything to add on before we wrap up our session?
No, I think we covered most of the important points today. I think the bottom line is prevention is better than cure. I mean, if we look after ourselves in terms of a healthy diet, in terms of having regular exercises, and of course taking good care and trying to avoid stress, we can actually reduce our risk of getting a heart attack. So I think that's the bottom line, the take-home message for today, I think.
Alright, thank you Dr. Yee. So stay healthy, Kaki Watson, until we meet again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.